Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Kozlov, and I am the Program Coordinator, Research and Training at Canada's Stem Cell Network. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar, From Vision to Value, Leveraging Health Economics to Maximize the Translational Potential of Your Research. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. The work of Canada's Stem Cell Network occurs from coast to coast and occurs on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of many Indigenous peoples and nations, including the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, where SCN is headquartered. SCN honors, recognizes, and respects these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters where we work and meet. SCN is a not-for-profit organization supporting stem cell research and regenerative medicine through training, funding opportunities, knowledge mobilization, and enhancing the commercialization readiness of stem cell and regenerative medicine innovations. To learn more about SCN's vision and mandate, please check out our recently released strategic plan. SCN's training pillar helps support our community in building expertise and knowledge in the field of stem cells and regenerative medicine. We are committed to the goal of educating in core areas that provide researchers with the skill sets to enable the translation of research discoveries into treatments for patients. We are excited that you've joined us for today's webinar, which will help you learn how to incorporate economic considerations in your strategies for translating your research from the lab to clinical trials and widespread application. SCN hosts many other courses, workshops, funding opportunities, and symposiums throughout the year for trainees, highly qualified personnel, and principal investigators. You can check out these opportunities on our website, stemcellnetwork.ca. With that, I'd like to introduce and thank Dr. Jason Robert Guertin and Dr. Lucie Germain, who will be leading this webinar. Dr. Guertin is an associate professor in economic evaluation of health technologies at Université Laval and a researcher at the CHU de Québec Université Laval Research Center. His program focuses on real-world cost-effectiveness analyses of technologies in regenerative medicine and rare diseases. As director of the economic infrastructure in regenerative medicine for Réseau TECEL and the pharmacoeconomics axis for the RQRM, he leads various knowledge translation initiatives supporting the uptake of economic considerations by health sciences researchers. Dr. Guertin is the inaugural recipient of the Dr. Murray Cran Award in Health Economics from Canada's Drug Agency and consults for various health technology assessment agencies. Dr. Lucie Germain is a full professor at the Faculty of Medicine, Université Laval, and the director of the LOEX Tissue Engineering Research Center of Université Laval. Her research is dedicated to postnatal stem cells and the reconstruction of human tissues for experimental and clinical applications. Dr. Germain's work has led to 3 clinical trials on humans involving engineered tissues produced in vitro, including cultured epithelial corneal autografts for the treatment of limbal stem cell deficiency, and autologous bilayer skin substitutes for grafting severely burned patients. She is currently using tissue engineering in combination with gene therapy to design a treatment for the genetic disease epidermolysis bullosa. Dr. Germain is the recipient of a Quality of Life Research Award from the Institute of Musculoskeletal Health and Arthritis of CIHR, and her substantial and sustainable contribution to health research was recognized by the Foundation Scheme of CIHR. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded up until the Q&A period at the end. To ask your questions, please put them in the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Without further ado, Dr. Guertin and Dr. Germain, over to you.
Thank you. So, good morning, everybody. Just to go quickly over a couple of learning objectives for this morning's talk. So we've identified 3 main objectives. So identifying key economic considerations at each stage of the research translation process, applying health economics to project planning to enhance scalability and viability of your different projects, as well as incorporating patients and societal perspective to demonstrate broader value. So the outline for today will be in a 2-part process. So in the first half, I'm going to cover a couple of key concepts in health economics, just to give you a broader overview of what the field is. And in the second half, we're going to try to bridge those to the fundamental researchers in the stem cell network. So trying to provide you with how a drug, a technology is developed through its whole product life cycle, and then trying to incorporate how we can add in economic considerations at various steps in that process. So without further ado, what is economic evaluation? So the objective of an economic evaluation is to help public and private decision makers determine if the adoption of a health technology represents the best use of limited resources while maximizing population's health. The reason the field exists is because we are constrained by limited resources, both material, human, and economics. While demand for healthcare is infinite, we can always want to be in better health. And we have, unfortunately, an issue where we can't say yes to all health technologies. We can't care for everyone in the best way possible, considering the fact that we will have issues with the limited resources and budgets we will have. So there's always this trade-off that needs to be done. And economic evaluations are designed to help decision makers get that idea of what is the best bang for buck, or traditional expression, saying what technology will provide us the most health, considering the fact that more often than not, it will increase budget. And before switching up to the next slide, this is a very important concept. Health economics does not assume that a technology needs to be cheaper to get reimbursed. I think that's a very broad misconception of my field. Economic evaluations will always allow a new technology to be more expensive than the status quo, conditional on the fact that it provides more effectiveness than the status quo. So we always need to be paying for something that is better, not just paying more. So the way we do this is through the economic evaluation process. So it's an analysis that compares two health technologies or more from both a cost side and an effectiveness side. I say two health technologies, but one thing you need to keep in mind is that usual care and potentially a do-nothing strategy can also be considered health technologies. The fact that we're not caring for someone will have economic costs, will have clinical consequences for that person. And it is potentially a strategy that we might need to consider. And this is especially true if we're considering a fact where the new technology is the first one available for this concept or for this disease. Before going into exactly the specifics of an economic evaluation, I want to cover three specific parameters that we need to discuss that are commonly incorporated in all economic evaluation. So the study perspective, time horizon of the study, and discounting of costs and benefits. So first, study perspective. The study perspective is the viewpoint from which the economic evaluation is conducted. I identify here through the use of 4 pictograms the most commonly used perspectives that we'll have in Canada and worldwide. On the left-hand side, the patient or their caregiver. So what are the expenses that are incurred solely by those patients when they are sick or when they are getting treatment? The second pictogram represents the hospital. As you all know, our healthcare system is centered around hospital care. So the fact that we have hospitals that will provide care, will have expenses, is one perspective that we commonly see, especially in regards to technologies that are really implemented within the hospital setting solely. However, hospitals, even though that they're forefront of our healthcare system, they're not the only part of the healthcare system. And the third pictogram actually reflects that in the more broader healthcare system perspective. So our Ministry of Health perspective is another synonym that you might be seeing in several papers. So basically it incorporates the hospital, but also all other hospitals that you can have. Also incorporates the healthcare system, the nurses, the EDs, and the outpatient visits that are outside of a specific hospital system, but are all paid for through our healthcare system. Lastly, I have the city pictogram, which represents the most broader umbrella term for our perspective, which is the societal perspective. The idea of every expense that we can have in our system will be included in the societal perspective. Quebec, and more recently Canada, has really pushed to going beyond the healthcare system to really incorporate this societal perspective. This is mostly in regards to the fact that, yes, healthcare systems and expenses will be incurred following the disease, following the adoption of a treatment. However, if we care for a patient, there's also benefits that are broader that will be included for society. Imagine a situation where we have patients that are now able to work, that no longer require caregivers. That time and that money that is available to the healthcare system has value to our society. So that societal perspective, unlike the other perspective, really tries to bridge those two dimensions. So going back, keep in mind that the study perspective really identifies which costs will be included in your economic calculation. The caveat being that if your study perspective omits a cost, then it will not be included because it will be lacking from this perspective, which is, like I said, the issue that we're trying to circumvent by going from the healthcare system perspective to the more societal perspective. The second parameter I want to talk about is the time horizon of the study. So the time horizon really reflects the period of time over which the costs and outcomes are measured in the economic valuation. There's no clear-cut way of saying what is the best time horizon for a study. They can be very short, several days, several weeks, a hospitalization, for example, but they also can be very long, up to the patient's life expectancy, from the time of admitting the patient or providing the treatment up to their death. What we normally say the best time horizon is the one that will cover the whole period that is relevant to the technology or the disease that is being valued. So if your condition is very acute, your time horizon will be very short. If your condition is potentially chronic, it will be favoring more long-term, maybe lifetime horizons. Lastly, I'm going to talk about discounting. And discounting is a little bit more complex. I apologize if you're not mathematically inclined, but basically it is a process by which costs and benefits occurring in the future are converted to their equivalent present values in function of discount rate. So a very simpler version of this, discounting will have the impact that if more time arrives before the costs and the benefits occur, the less of an impact it will have. So we favor true discounting issues and items that occur quickly and downweight those that are long-term. Another way of seeing this is the fact that we're going to favor benefits that are earlier on, but costs that occur later in life. Unfortunately, that is normally not how regenerative medicine works. Most of the technologies you're going to be producing will have very strong upfront costs, potentially spread out over a couple of months, a couple of years if we're lucky. But the benefits you're going to see could arrive much later down the road. So this is a very important parameter that you need to keep in mind because this could discredit, in a sense, your work. And I say discredit as it's going to be a hurdle we need to cross, not necessarily a mountain that we won't be able to scale up. Lastly, I want to talk about the different types of economic evaluations. So I don't have the time to cover all of these, but what I'm going to cover today is the most frequent one we see in the literature in North America, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, which are cost-utility analysis. So the cost-utility analysis will cover all of the expenses that occur once we use one technology or over the other, but they'll also consider the benefits that they provide. And benefits for cost-utility analyses are very specific in the sense that we refer to benefits in the cost-utility analysis through the use of a composite outcome, the most commonly used, which is the quality-adjusted life year or the quality. So, like all economic valuations, the cost-utility analysis aims to estimate the incremental cost and the incremental effectiveness of one treatment over another, at least another. And we do so, like I just said, with the use of the quality-adjusted life year, the quality. So a quality is simply the quantification of the amount of life gain and in the state in which it is spent. It is estimated by multiplying the amount of life spent in health state by the utility score, which is assigned to this. And the utility score basically reflects your preference for your health state. The more your health state is preferable, the higher the utility score is. The less it is preferable, the lower the score is. Graphically, this is what we're going to get. On the y-axis, you have that utility score. So by convention, utility scores range from 0 to 1, where 1 represents perfect life, and 0 represents states that are equivalent to that. So what we have here is a scenario where we have a patient that is treated with a treatment A that will live a certain amount of time and will unfortunately pass away suddenly. The cost effectiveness analysis, the cost utility analysis will conduct a clone of this study, basically comparing the same patient had it been treated with treatment B. So what we will see here is, had this person had treatment B, they would initially survive that event that caused their death with A, but gradually have a decreasing utility score up to their time of death with B. So what we're going to try to do in the cost utility analysis is calculate this area under the curve, where it shows us the gain in life year, but also the gain in quality. And like I just said, estimating the quality is basically estimating the area under the curve. So what is the utility score for the given health state that is multiplied by the number of years of life gained in that health state? A couple of important caveats that we need to consider when we're looking at utility scores. Unfortunately, preferences for health states differ substantially between jurisdictions. In a sense, economic evaluation in its whole has a very large issue with very poor external validity. So what we conduct in one jurisdiction will very difficultly being converted in another jurisdiction. Utility scores are no exception in this regard. So when we conduct utility score measures for Canada, for example, they will be very limited value outside of Canada. And on average, they should differ where they're done in Canada versus where they're done elsewhere. Not only are the utility scores very country specific, they are also method specific. So we have different ways of assessing utility scores for states. Patients have to answer various types of questionnaires to see what is the value of the technology, what is the value of the health state they're in. So we have direct methods that are unfortunately very long and complex that ask patients to answer a series of questions. They can be very time consuming. Give you an example, the average time spent conducting a direct method assessment will be roughly half an hour or so. Luckily for us, there are alternatives which are indirect methods that will use standardized questionnaires that have the advantage of being very short, maybe 5 to 10 questions on average, but unfortunately could be imprecise in several contexts. So both have strengths, but unfortunately both have weaknesses that we need to account depending on what study you're conducting. Once all of this is done, the question is, how do we interpret the results of the economic evaluation? So the results of the cost utility analyses are usually provided thanks to the incremental cost effectiveness ratio, which is more commonly referred to as the ICER. So the ICER is basically the differential in costs of treatment B versus treatment A over the differential in effectiveness of B and A. Mathematically, this is a little bit complex, and I think it's a lot easier for people to identify this through a graphical form. So on the right-hand side, you have the ICER formula that I just presented, whereas on the left-hand side, you have what we call the cost effectiveness plane. So basically trying to put that ICER value in one of those quadrants. So depending what your result is, if you're either in the top left or bottom right, you are what we will say a dominated or a dominant situation. So what that means is basically no one would pay more for less effectiveness, whereas everyone would choose more effectiveness for lower costs. So dominated will be systematically excluded from the analyses, so technologies that we would always refuse, whereas dominant technologies would always be the one that we would favor. Unfortunately for us, though, it's very rare that we're specifically in one of these two quadrants. What normally happens is we're in one of the two white quadrants right now. And if our result happens to be in one of those quadrants, what we need to keep into account is what we call payers' willingness to pay. So what the payers' willingness to pay is basically what is the maximum amount we are willing to spend for the measure of effectiveness we're providing. So if your result is below that maximum, you will be deemed cost effective. If you are above that threshold, you will be deemed non-cost effective. Sorry. One issue here that you need to keep in mind is though we have basic ideas of what the willingness to pay threshold is, it is unfortunately non-disclosed in Canada. So it is an issue that we can give you ideas of how cost effective your technology is, but unless we have a payer that specifically mentions what is their maximum threshold, we will not be able to provide that. So I'll pass the floor to Lucy and I will be back at her section.
So here we present the case of product X. This is a hypothetical case study. So what are the steps? So the first step for product is the discovery in the laboratory. So everybody is happy to have a discovery, new product, product X. So next step is to do in vitro experiments to confirm the discovery. Then in vitro preclinical experiments to evaluate the safety and the efficacy of the product. After that, we go to preclinical animal experiments for also safety and efficacy. Then begin the development of manufacturing and distribution process at a human scale. So process validation, analytical method validation, packaging, transport system, shelf life, standard operating procedures. Then the development of the clinical protocol. So we need to define the operational objectives, the inclusion, exclusion criteria, the endpoints, the statistic, the standard operating procedure, the case report form, the informed consent form. So all of these forms have to be written. And during this process, there could be meeting with Health Canada. And then there'll be an application for the clinical trial. So here's the product life cycle. It is a schematic view drawn by Health Canada. So this is for the product vigilance and benefit risk management. So the previous slide was this part, the discovery of the product. And then if the meeting was not done previously, there'll be a pre-submission meeting before the clinical trial. And then we have to send all the paper for review by Health Canada to ask for the clinical trial. When the review is performed and we have answered all the questions from Health Canada, then if everything is fine, Health Canada will give us the non-objection letters that allow us to begin the clinical trial. For these products in regenerative medicine, such as stem cells or tissue engineered substitutes, or cells for gene therapy. There is two clinical phase, the early phase, which is phase 1-2, and the late phase, which are the phase 2-3 clinical trial. So after completing the clinical trial, and having all the data and the analysis of all data of clinical trial, then there'll be a meeting with Health Canada for before the submission of all the information to ask for the authorization for commercialization. So after the meeting, everything is prepared for a submission to be reviewed by Health Canada. Then there is the authorization for commercialization if everything is fine. So the product X could be commercialized, but this is not the end of the analysis. Then there'll be the early post-market period where there'll be more data accumulated. Then the integration of the new information And there'll be a reevaluation of the authorization for commercialization. And if everything is fine, it could continue. But if there is some problem, there could be a removal of the product from the market. And then with the improvement of the product, the cycle can start again. So I'll let Jason to continue.
Thank you, Lucie. So, sorry. So how do we incorporate economic aspects in that drug development lifecycle? So basically, economics can occur at various time points during that development phase. Usually, I will say that the economic evaluation aspects will arrive subsequent to the fact that you've discovered your treatment. You are now ready to do your clinical trials. So how do we economics come to play? So in that discovery to clinical trial phase, we can basically help you trying to identify what is the demand or market size. We'll do so by doing epidemiological studies to identify what is the condition you're looking at, what is the prevalence, what is the incidence of disease, what happens to patients once they are diagnosed. Are they diagnosed only subsequent to their death, or are they diagnosed and have to live with this condition for many months, many years? And how can that play, and where would your drug or treatment come into that pathway, and how would it change it? So we also look at the potential market size. We can help you seeing on the context of where are the cases that you'll be treating? What is the market you're looking at? How do reimbursement criteria differ within these different markets? But it also comes into play in the fact that we can help you identify what are the potential competitors you're going to have once you do come to market, hopefully. Subsequent to this, we're going to have our clinical trials that are going to either will be initiated or will soon to be. And that is where we can have a process known as early economic evaluation. So an early economic evaluation is the idea that we can establish under what condition a hypothetical intervention can be deemed cost-effective based on its projected cost and effectiveness profile compared to those of its competitors. So you have this example here where we're going to say, so based on the potential effectiveness profile it has and the potential cost it has, how likely will it be cost effective? So depending on what you're looking at, this could come to play in saying that your treatment has a high potential for being cost effective. Hopefully, if you make it safe and you confirm its effectiveness profile, you'll be very likely to be reimbursed or deemed cost effective by HTA bodies. Unfortunately, you can have the opposite. This step could help you identify the fact that either for lack of effectiveness or for too high costs, we cannot foresee it being cost effective in its current state. And this plays in the sense that we can help you identify, well, how could you improve either your effectiveness or your cost profile or both, and making sure that once you've achieved this, if you deem it feasible, your technology will be identified as being cost effective. Following the early economic evaluation, we've decided that we will be continuing our trial. Well, there's a second role that we can play in that step. We can help you identify various tools that you will use within the clinical trial to assess cost effectiveness data, as well as getting some parameters that you might need later down the road. So we can do so by conducting cost analyses. We can provide you help in designing cost questionnaires and utility score questionnaires. Keeping in mind that the two first ones are really in the sense that we're trying to bridge beyond what is normally available in the literature, which has historically been limited to the hospital health system care perspective. Like I said beforehand, Quebec, Canada really are pushing for having societal perspective, and the literature is very scarce on what is actually spent by patients when they are sick, what is spent by the caregivers to aid these patients. So we have to design tools to assess this information as it's not readily available. From a broader point of view, this is actually a much bigger issue for regenerative medicine, because we have very limited cost data available ahead of time But because regenerative medicine focuses on such rare conditions or potentially unique conditions, that the readily available cost data might not be enough. So one thing we can look at is the scientific literature, of course. I've identified here the Medline mesh, which for economic evaluations, which are cost benefit analyses. So basically, will identify us what is available. But assuming it's not, what we could do and help you with is trying to design cost studies that will look at how much costs are incurred by healthcare system when a patient gets sick, when patients will be diagnosed. And we do so by looking at hospital financial data. We can do so by looking at provincial and national health institute data. I list here CIHI, so the Canadian Institute for Health Information. We have the RAMQ in Quebec, ICES in Ontario, which are provincial databases that can be used to conduct cost analysis. Lastly, like I said, we have issues with how much expenses are incurred by patients and caregivers when they are sick. And getting that information will normally require us to do prospective studies using cost questionnaires. So I list here a cost questionnaire on which I was involved with a couple of years back, which is the COPAC, the Cost per Patient Questionnaire. The advantage of this questionnaire is really a generic tool that was designed to be used by clinicians, by researchers, assessing patient costs. So we cover expenses related to travel, expenses related to costs incurred while accessing care, and time and income loss that can be lost due to being sick or caring for someone else. And you have the website here where we can access freely the English version of the questionnaire. Other types of questionnaires we can help you are related specifically to cost utility analyses that we talked in the first half. We need utility score measures to assess and conduct cost utility analysis. Unfortunately, utility scores might not be available for the condition you're looking at. If they are, great, but if they're not, we're going to have to conduct studies specifically focusing on these utility measures. So I list here two of the most commonly used utility score questionnaires, the EQ5D, the UE, which are both readily available in French and English and have been designed to work in the Canadian context. One thing that you have to keep in mind here, without going in specific details on all of these questionnaires, is that each questionnaire is different and will examine different dimensions of health. For example, pain, mobility. The question you need to ask and on which we can help you is to identify which questionnaire most adapts to the condition you're looking at. Because we have to have a tool that will specifically examine the potential consequences of the treatment or of the condition that you're looking at. Because if it's not included in the questionnaire, we will unfortunately miss it. So this is a very important step that needs to be determined ahead of time. We've gone through the step. We're lucky enough to have a trial that was completed. Where economic evaluation comes to play here is where it's most commonly used role is to conduct the formal economic evaluation. So identifying if the new treatment is considered to be cost-effective compared to comparator. And the advantage of right now, most of what is done in the literature and by health economists across the country is we only arrive at this step. Fortunately, for some teams, we arrive so late in the process that you've conducted your clinical trial and you haven't planned for the economic evaluation, and we can't make miracles. We cannot produce inputs if no inputs exist. So we have to work some time retrospectively in creating these inputs so that we can feed the model. But if we've been involved earlier on, we can actually already plan what we need as model parameters. So this will be a lot quicker, and we will get our answers much quicker, much more rapidly than what we currently have if we arrive only later in the process. We deem our technology cost effective, then we will have a situation after you present your product to Health Canada to present the results to the health technology assessment agencies. In Canada, we have two health technology assessment agencies, the CDA, Canada's Drug Agency, which covers every province except for Quebec, and INES, which is specific to Quebec. I list here the two websites for those wondering and to get a little bit more information on them. The advantage of having the economics involved here is, first of all, they will require the economics to have the reimbursement process. And that step in the health technology assessment body is a very fundamental piece of the reimbursement process for public insurers. Keep in mind that though I only list the public insurers here, the whole process is very similar when you look at private insurers elsewhere in Canada. Every country except the US has their own HTA bodies that you can look at. They have very similar rules, but there will be some specificity that we need to consider. The US, though it doesn't have an official national HTA body, will conduct HTA processes within the private insurer space. Lastly, we come into play once your whole technology has been reimbursed, once we have buyers that are paying for this technology. The economic evaluation changes slightly at this step and more mimics the fact that what we were talking about earlier regarding the early economic evaluation. So the idea of the late stage economic evaluation, which is more often than not deemed to be the economic reevaluation of a technology, implies the fact that trial settings might be too artificial. In the real world, your treatment might not react the same way as what we had in our studies. So the real world reevaluation of your technology will try to grab the inputs that come from our post-market studies to assess the economic evaluation to make sure that potentially, had you had listing criteria that were negative, the real world assessment could help identify that, well, our technology is even better than what we had previously hoped. We should get better listing criteria. It could, unfortunately, also provide you information on the fact that your technology might not be as good as previously thought. And if that's the case, the economic reevaluation could also help identify specific issues that you could try to improve in a version 2.0, 3.0 of your technology. So, in conclusion, hope we were able to help you identify that it is extremely important to consider economic aspects of your treatment, even when it's only in the underdevelopment stage. In general, and this is for everything, economic data is severely lacking in Canada. But like I said beforehand, it's an even greater issue in the regenerative medicine space, as we tend to study relatively small populations and treatments that are used in low volume. So that is our talk for today. I will ask the stem cell staff to stop the recording, and I will be happy with receipt to answer your questions in the Q&A.